better than Cats. I believed that Cats would manage to make this one actually look like a pretty decent film. Instead, something unexpected happened. I walked out of The Rise of Skywalker to only realize that, no, I'd enjoyed Cats more. Cats was a more interesting movie. I'd at least never seen anything quite like it before. Some of the music was decent, some of the performances were kind of okay despite how weird they were. But The Rise of Skywalker? I had nothing positive to say. Nothing at all. So that's why I'm here today. It's how bad I think The Rise of Skywalker is. Quite one of my most hated films of all time. First and foremost, The Rise of Skywalker is a sequel. Definitely you actually kind of understand why. Because the film itself doesn't seem to know
to the top.
Okay, maybe that's a good one. But honestly, you could pretty much skip the last one. So little of what happens in that film matters. It only builds upon a few ideas from that movie. Those ideas being this concept of Rey taking Ren's hand and the revelation that her parents were no one, the part where Rey goes back to the island where Luke was, and Hux being a spy. Maybe there's some other small things, but I didn't notice them, and I don't think they're all that important are there. In fact, notice just the opposite. What happened to Rose? Like, I get that a lot of people don't like her character, and really, I wasn't all that invested in her either. But come on, the whole thing between her and Finn isn't even addressed here. It's just dropped like it never happened. To be fair, part of the problem here lies with The Last Jedi. A whole lot of nothing happened in that film, and a lot of plot threads were purposely dropped or discarded in the movie itself. Even so, what stuff was there should have been addressed, but it's not. Instead, the movie cuts forward to this whole Sith Wayfinder thing, Kylo Ren taking it down, and, well, I'll get into that. All in all, a lot of this film feels like an attempt to write over The Last Jedi. If anything, The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker are at battle with one another. For example, in The Last Jedi, Rey's parents were no one. Here? Nah, that's not what they were. They were actually somebody. We were just kidding. That's not what we meant. There, Snoke was killed, but never mind, Snoke was some sort of weird thing made by Palpatine, so it doesn't really matter, because that was just Palpatine anyway. Gotcha! Bet you didn't expect that, sucker! Yet, at the same time, Rise of Skywalker somehow manages to go too far in the other direction. What I mean is that it leans into the older films in this cloying, obnoxious way that it's like Mickey Mouse himself is grabbing you by the shoulder, pulling you close, and whispering, this was for you, you better like it, you stupid piece of crap, right in your ear. First, old characters are used as a way to form the film's plot, or to direct the film where it needs to go. Of course, Palpatine is the most blatant example of this. Apparently he's been hiding out here with a whole swarm of Death Stars for some reason. Even though his goal is to get Rey to come to him so he can possess her or something, and oh no, I'm already getting into the plot problems, and that's too early for that. I got a whole section about that later. Gotta slow down. Anyway, there's also Luke, who appears as a Force ghost. He shows up when Rey is about to give up on being a Jedi, and he of course corrects the plot with his big boy pep talk. Next up, Leia, whose words reach Kylo Ren just in time to stop him from slashing Rey. Finally, Lando, who happened to look for the Sith Wayfinder with Luke, and who Rey and the gang happened to run into. In the end, so many of the new characters' actions are tied up in these old characters. What I mean is that the moment they're about to make a quote-unquote bad decision or have something bad happen, the old boys swoop in and save the day. To me, it gives this weird sense that all the new characters, by that I mean the main characters of this trilogy, are puppets or pawns being moved from scene to scene by these old school characters.
Think we can help it?
Plus, all the callbacks. Maybe I wouldn't hate these so much if I didn't already hate the rest of this movie. Really, when Rey says that it's okay that we're here, we're relieved that we're here line, which is obviously a reference to the original film, I couldn't help but roll my eyes. And I actually laughed out loud when Papa Palpatine quoted the Darth Plagueis monologue when he was introduced. I didn't expect Palpatine to be a Deep Lord, but I respect it. Later, Chewie gets his medal because why didn't Chewie get his medal in the first movie? I hate it. I hate all these stupid, meaningless callbacks. I hate the way the music swells when Lando reveals himself like a big "you should be nutting here" sign is flashing above his head. I hate that all the music inserts feel like they're for Star Wars fans and not the story itself. I hate that this was the only chance to take the original cast and do something meaningful with them, and instead, they did this crap. And I'm not even a big Star Wars fan. Okay. It's fine. I'm in my happy place. I gotta calm down. Still have 25 minutes of this video. Here's the point. everyone's favorite part of their Star Wars review. The part where I complain about the plot holes, plot contrivances, and exposition. Basically, the part where I complain about everything related to the plot. Let's start with the contrivances, because this movie has an impressive amount of contrivances. I mean, pretty much every single scene has something contrived in it. First, Luke happened to be researching the Sith Wayfinder's location, which sure is convenient considering that Rey and the gang still need to get one now. Second, Lando happens to run into them when they're on the sand planet. On top of that, he happens to know about the Sith Wayfinder too. Third, Rey and the boys happen to fall into the quicksand stuff, and underneath it, there happens to be this Sith ship that has the dagger they need. Fourth, C-3PO happens to be unable to read the language it's written in. Fifth, when Rey's confronting Kylo Ren, the Millennium Falcon happens to swoop up to save her at the perfect time. Sixth, the dagger apparently has this weird device attached to it that Rey happens to immediately discover points to the spot in the destroyed Death Star. Seventh, this little droid happens to know a bunch of useful stuff about Exegol, which is where Palpatine's hiding out, and happens to tell the main characters right at the time they need to know that information. Eighth, you know what? I'm gonna stop. You get the point. It's fine to have some of these moments in a film. Sometimes things happen where the odds of them happening are low. I can accept that. In particular, films will often be front-loaded with a few things like this because that moment, that unexpected, unusual moment is what kickstarts the plot. Here though, these contrivances happen from the very beginning to the very end of the film. The plot.
Astronauts work their whole lives for a shot at the International Space Station.
What, it's gonna hurt, okay? I'm sorry.
So do software developers. Okay.
The directors that I previously was arguably too kind about the Disney-era Star Wars movies. Seeing as my thoughts on this trilogy has changed wildly over time compared to my naive, distant, starry-eyed videos of old, let me quickly explain my current feelings on the first two entries in this modern era. If you really don't care about hearing this, just skip to the timecode on screen now to hear just about the rise of Skywalker, which I will be spoiling, so come back later once you've seen it. Care about spoilers. I feel I kind of need to backpedal and explain myself with a little more clarity as to where I stand to avoid the copious amounts of garbage that is spun about me just because of these films. Because remember, opinions aren't linear, they're allowed to change with time, believe it or not. This will only be brief, so don't worry. The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens is just an okay movie to me in hindsight. You have to understand the thrill of a new Star Wars movie had a certain novelty to it that swept most people away at the time, partially because of how good those initial trailers were. Even some of the most jaded fans thought it was a lot of fun, and in a lot of ways, it is. I'd say it's about on the same level as that Star Trek reboot that Jar Jar Abrams also directed. It's slick and quippy, but gets weaker the more you think about it, because of the director's obnoxious reverence to the originals, clearly being considered more important than allowing it to be its own thing. I think most of us initially forgave the familiarity with the plot, excusing it as a safe and reasonable approach to bring the series back to a level more in line with the classics. I think I was so desperate for anything that wasn't the prequels that I got a bit carried away with my affection for the movie, despite saying at the time that I'd only be okay with the timid, crowd-pleasing decisions as long as the sequels weren't just nostalgia-fueled remakes of the originals in the same way. Of course, now all the movies are out, behind-the-scenes drama has unfolded, and it's clear they had no idea where they were going, so I obviously feel differently about it now. The premise is interesting enough and the first act is fairly solid, but as soon as the Falcon is reintroduced, it slowly starts to decline, until you reach a fairly standard and forgettable climax that is just a worse version of A New Hope. A lot of people think it was a great starting off point, but the more I think about it, the less I agree with that idea. I think ultimately the interesting part of the story was skipped over in service of, well, the fan service. The rise of the First Order and training and betrayal of Kylo Ren is what the true source of intrigue behind this plot is to me. This all skipped over probably because of the original actors being too old and the need for the movie to have an army of X-Wings and an army of TIE Fighters because of the bankable iconography. It's not a film I've revisited for a long time, and honestly, I simply don't feel the need to. It also started the trend of Star Wars having this kind of annoying sense of humor that pulls you out of a movie nearly every time they attempt to be funny. I always thought Star Wars took itself so seriously, and that's mostly what made it funny, and they had good lines. The actors weren't mugging the camera to try to get a Marvel laugh. It feels so weird sometimes.
None of your business, that's why. Where's my boyfriend?
For something?
The Last Jedi. think the confusion over my opinions on The Last Jedi comes from two different places. The first being that I stupidly decided to slant my video on the fan reaction more than just talking about the movie itself. So for some reason, a lot of people took away this idea that I don't think it's okay to dislike the movie, which is obviously absurd. I completely understand why one would dislike The Last Jedi. It's a complete mess of a movie from a script perspective in a lot of ways that I simply cannot defend. The second point is that I only really enjoy this film as a standalone Rian Johnson guilty pleasure. I'm actually a long-time fan of his work. If you forget about this movie for a second, I think some of his directorial outputs are pretty outstanding. Rip, Knives Out, Looper, and the episodes of Breaking Bad that he directed all prove that he is not the hack that some people think he is. The problems arise there when you take into account that this movie is supposed to be part of a pre-existing saga and the middle film in a trilogy. It's such an insular, myopic take on the universe that really doesn't feel like it belongs, especially with how cleanly it wraps up at the end. He's a fairly conceptual director who is obsessed with broad themes and purposefully defying expectations with various twists and turns, which is fine when you're telling a whodunit murder mystery or a standalone time travel science fiction story, but creates a huge divide when he's single-handedly given the reins to the biggest intellectual property of all time. Why did they do that? Why we still need a Star Wars story, something that's easy to ignore? I think he would have always been an excellent choice as a director that would have brought a unique style and vision to the movie, but it's his writing choices that have fans more divided than anything. For every moment of brilliance, there's an equally stupid moment to match. The Leia scene looks ridiculous. Canto Bight is a largely pointless side quest. Multiple scenes are far too similar to the originals. Luke throwing his lightsaber away is idiotic and makes no sense and isn't funny. The excellent deleted scenes were bafflingly excluded from the final cut. The humor especially takes me out of the movie, just the general insistence on cleverness can be irritating at times. There are so many decisions that I find impossible to defend or justify, especially with the more time that passes. I just wish the film was more about Luke, Rey, and Kylo, because of the other stuff feeling of little consequence in comparison. I still think it's one of the more interesting Star Wars movies to discuss and argue about on Twitter. It's so divisive that the discussion around it will be big news for years to come. The Rise of Skywalker. For some reason, I had this idea, the tiny fragment of hope that the Rise of Skywalker would be the connective tissue that would tie everything together and make it seem like a worthwhile journey. However, I found the opposite to be the case. It is so appallingly obvious that this film is a pathetic, reactionary move that is desperately clawing at fans in a sad attempt to make any of this story feel worthwhile. This is J.J. Abrams' very worst. If anything, it's extremely reminiscent of Star Trek Into Darkness, which is another nostalgia-fueled remake of a story we've all seen before. His gimmick is to construct new films in a series, but just use the skeleton of the previous movies with a new coat of paint and an infuriating amount of fan service. To tell the honest truth, there was a section in the middle of the movie where it began to win me over. The gang of heroes gallivanting around the galaxy chasing various MacGuffins, kind of like Indiana Jones, Steven Spielberg, slowly attempting to add some characterization to the fairly bland cast of characters. However, when you take into account how the first act of the movie is about as messy as Rogue One's similarly confused planet-jumping introduction, compared with the obnoxious action finale with so many ships flying around and shooting at each other that it's clearly overcompensating for the lack of real stakes, character drama, or tension. Yeah, I really liked it when the Emperor used hyper-lightning hands and sent out a shockwave that rippled miles in the sky. That wasn't stupid at all. I'm usually a complete sucker for emotional moments in Star Wars, but there was only one point in the movie where I felt any sort of weight, that being when Leia passes away and Chewie cries in utter pain. Seeing as he's been forced to watch every last one of his friends slowly perish around him, he just came to the realization that he's completely alone in this galaxy. Which again is a fairly cheap beat to hit because I only really care about those characters because of my investment in the originals. Nothing to do has any real depth or complexity, especially with Poe or Finn. Both feel like they've had very little to do with the
It's over. Being an Inquisitor taught me no setback is too great. When you've already lost yourself, a limb's easy. You know, I was a Jedi. It'd be fun to bring you in. Watch you look like the rest of us! Oh, angers you. Just wait till the isolation, torture, mutilation, and your breath! I won't let you touch them! You can't stop the Empire!
I can stop you. done an Inquisitor.